starts from the definition itself. That has been a challenging with a lot of stakeholders. What is this animal called development effectiveness all about?
Well, there is no clear definition nor universally accepted definition of development effectiveness.
If we talk about development effectiveness, we talk about local ownership, we talk about democratic ownership, we talk about governments who listen to us.
Para nosotros la efectividad del desarrollo supone fundamentalmente combatir la desigualdad, repartir mejor la riqueza.
Et lorsqu'on parle d'efficacité de développement, on fait bien référence aux conditions de vie des populations déshéritées, on fait référence à l'exercice de leurs droits. C'est une approche qui est essentiellement fondée sur les droits.
For marginalized people to exercise their rights.
To introduce positive change in development by addressing the real causes and results of poverty, unemployment, social marginalization.
We use in Africa wealth creation because we do no longer use the term poverty eradication.
Development effectiveness nowadays is indeed a priority for the trade union movement as a whole.
More effective development in Kenya would translate to real meaningful development programs that, one, will ensure sustainable development, two, will create better jobs, three, sustainable livelihood, four, accountable public institutions that deliver better services.
It points to the impact and outcome of aid.
Ensuring that women are part of development, that they get a say in development, that they really articulate exactly what development should look like for them, that they own it.
Development effectiveness is all about impacts of the work we do in our constituencies. It is also about realizing and fulfillment of human rights, that is the right to shelter, the right to food. It is all about sustainable development.
Development is much more than delivering aid. The development is how all actors in a country can cooperate to actually provide development results.
It would make every difference in the lives of the people we serve.
So for many of us, this whole issue about enabling environment, development effectiveness is a matter of life and death.
Open Forum is international CSO-driven process to shape and implement the framework for CSO development effectiveness.
Better Aid in turn has been founded to influence official aid, official donors, and it's a network of CSOs, and we focus in particular on the high-level forum on aid effectiveness and the Working Party on aid effectiveness hosted by the OECD. Our aim is, of course, to make sure that aid works for the poor.
The synergies between Better Aid and an Open Forum is that firstly we are from the civil society sector. We're advocating similar and common messages, primarily that Better Aid or aid effectiveness is premised on CSO development effectiveness. And the ways in which we can work effectively together is to develop common strategies for Busan.
We feel that aid is like a band-aid. It's a patchwork solution to a structural problem. So now development effectiveness for us is important because you are pushing it to the next level. This time we need to talk about the structural roots of poverty. And if we do get to resolve these issues, then there's no need for aid at all.
The level of poverty today is higher than the poverty levels we had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. At the same time, the paradox is that we have aid coming or flowing to Africa more than before.
Currently in Asia, we were supposed to be treated as the food basket of the world, but it is also in Asia where you can find the biggest population of hungry people who provide food for the world, and yet we have the greatest number of people who are suffering from hunger.
$100 billion may sound like a lot of money, but it's not when one talks about the degrees of problems and issues that we're dealing with.
What we need is not a lot of money, but just how to use the little money to do the right things.
Economic growth is not the only answer, is not sufficient. We would like to take an alternative approach, putting the accent really on the social development of people that we are supposed to support.
El principal problema de América Latina no es la pobreza, sino la desigualdad. La desigualdad entre campesinos y gente de las ciudades, entre hombres y mujeres, entre indígenas y blancos, entre blancos y negros.
We've seen less and less focus on women's rights through both aid and development. Really what we want to see is that women's rights and broadly human rights are a condition for all development processes.
For the Arab region now, the situation is very messy and complicated because we are entering in a situation where everything is changing. So it's very important in this very important moment to highlight the development effectiveness agenda and the better aid agenda.
And as far as we still continue using the current mechanical frameworks to deliver aid or to deliver resources to the masses, the general public, it's going to be very difficult for us to have a meaningful change.
The progress has been that we as civil society across North and South, in the women's groups, in many sectors, but I will speak specifically of the women's groups, we have sat down and started looking at ourselves and trying to figure out how can we be more effective.
The successes we can talk about from African region in terms of implementing development effectiveness is its ability to bring governments, our partner governments and donors and civil society together to start discussing about this. Well, that has been a missing link.
In Europe, I think with the debate about development effectiveness, and mainly after Accra, the Accra High-Level Forum, there has started a very interesting and promising dialogue, a very profound dialogue between the European institutions, civil society and local authorities.
The main objective of this process is to try to find a common understanding and kind of consensus of the main issue linking to EC relation, European Commission relation with civil society organization and local authorities.
At least we have started talking about the need to see results on the ground. Everybody is asking now, where are the results?
Our achievement is being able to set development effectiveness as the standard, as the objective of everyone in the aid business.
Civil society, with the principles elaborated by the CSO, by the Open Forum in general, and the principles elaborated by the Better Aid, they can be used as important tools for advocacy, for raising awareness, and for negotiating with the main players and stakeholders, whether they are the governments or the donors or other agencies.
10 years ago, most aid was tied to the condition that all supplies were purchased from the donor countries. This legal constraint has been removed, but still the results haven't changed much.
At Africa level, the African Union has declared the years between 2010 and 2020 as the African Women's Decade. So we feel that that is an achievement. But for as long as the intended objectives of the decade are not implemented, then we feel that there's not going to be development effectiveness.
Yes, there are many more children in school, for example, all over Africa. The problem now is the quality of education. But you know, that's the way it goes. You get some improvement and then you need more.
Donors are still promoting economic interests through aid. Aid is not really focused on poverty eradication. The allocation of aid is distorted. Donors tend to channel aid to countries or to sectors which are of economic interest for them. And secondly, it's also about the way how donors are providing aid. Well, what I said, 2/3 of contracts still go to the north, and much aid is actually boomerang aid.
Lots of resources are lost in administrative costs, overhead costs, that are not about changing people's lives.
We have in Africa issues of corruption, lack of transparency in the use of aid, so that with development effectiveness, we can have civil society organizations also as co-actors in development to interrogate and actually monitor aid that is given to their governments.
We alone as civil society cannot be true to the Istanbul principles, because we live in an environment where governments and donors set rules and regulations and laws, and our observation of the last year is that those conditions for civil society have actually deteriorated.
Fundamentalmente, el problema es que nuestras organizaciones sociales están sufriendo problemas de sostenibilidad, tienen problemas de relación con las autoridades, se enfrentan con dificultades normativas, de financiamiento, de ambiente para realizar su trabajo.
Maybe one of the challenges that we foresee as we go to Busan is probably lack of political will.
Les populations n'arrivent pas à mettre en avant leurs priorités pour que ces priorités soient traduites en termes de programmes de développement.
The challenge is again our governments. The challenge is asking for a democratic process, asking for inclusion of all the voices.
Indeed, there is a global trend of crackdown on civil society activists and civil society space itself. That is indeed a very worrying trend. This trend is recognized not only by this process, but also by various human rights bodies, including the Human Rights Council itself, the special rapporteurs, and various reports produced by civil society organizations.
The challenges for CSOs is that there is a tendency by many donors and governments to simplify CSOs as private development assistance. And when you make that simplification, then you lose the heart of what CSOs are there for. It is not about the $30 billion that CSOs raise by themselves for services for the poor, but it's a significant amount of money. But the important thing is why CSOs are doing it and how they are doing it.
Government aid is not enough, and you must have people's organizations active to be able to achieve development.